My name is William Laker. I am the president of the Keilor East RSL. Keilor East RSL is pleased to sponsor the story of Laurie Larmer, a local hero. The story of Laurie's World War II service flying Halifax bombers is of interest to all of us, as are the events initiated by Laurie 70 years after the war commenced. This person's story brings home to us all the extraordinary courage of Australian service personnel during the war. Laurie is one of many Australian heroes.
This is the story of a local lad from Essendon named Laurie Larmer, who became a bomber pilot in World War II. Laurie was keen to participate in the war, but in his own way.
When I turned 18 in 1941, got a letter from the, I think it was from the Department of the Army or the Defence Department, I think it was the Department of the Army, to report to the nearest drill hall for a medical examination within 14 or 28 days. And that was preparatory to going into the Army. The only way you could avoid going into the Army was to volunteer for either the Navy or the Air Force. I didn't fancy the Army, I didn't fancy the Navy. The Air Force was getting a little bit of glamour. I don't know whether that affected me at the time. Probably as a kid of 18 in 1941, it didn't sort of have that sort of an impression on me, but I just thought, well, the Air Force seems to be the better thing.
He was sent for training in Canada. He became part of the Air Empire training scheme to be a pilot.
We trained under what they call the Empire Air Training Scheme. That was mainly affected Australians, New Zealanders, Canadians and South Africans. One morning about 10 o'clock I was called into the flight office, and the flight commander said, "You're going to 51 Squadron." And I said, "Oh yeah, when?" He said, "This afternoon the train leaves at 2 o'clock. That's the truth.
He then sailed on the Aquitania to England, where he was stationed at Brighton prior to being deployed on active duty.
After about 2 or 3 weeks, I think I was at Brighton at this stage, and we were posted to. I was posted to Litchfield, which was an operational training unit, an Australian operational training unit. The ground staff were English, but all the flying staff were, and the instructors were Australian. There we formed a crew. I got a navigator, a bomb aimer, a wireless operator and 2 gunners, and myself. That made 6. And there we flew Wellingtons, which was a heavy aircraft, very heavy aircraft, and had been used as a bomber in the early stages of the war. Wasn't fast enough, and it couldn't carry enough big enough bomb load to be of any worth.
He was then sent to Snaith, where he began missions flying Halifax bombers.
There was another crew there, an English crew, came on the same train as us, and we were 2 replacement crews. And we didn't find out, and we never did find out, whether we were replacing crews that had been lost in operations or crews that had finished their tours. We lived in Nissan huts down near the township, near the little village, some mile and a quarter from the main station. The aircraft were all dispersed around. They weren't in hangars, of course, but and, we all had bikes, and we used to ride a bike up from where we billeted it up to the mess for meals, and then back to our unit, or to our hut where we lived. As an officer, by that time I'd got a commission. As an officer, I had a private room. The crew slept in a Nissan hut, probably 15 and 20 in a hut. The breakfast was pretty awful. I can remember I'm not sure whether it was at Snaith or at Driffield after the war. One morning for breakfast you'd have kippered herrings, which was something to be avoided, and the next morning would be baked beans on toast. So I only used to go to breakfast every second morning, and then when you returned from an operational flight, you got another feed of bacon and eggs. But and that was a sort of, well, I don't know, it didn't make up for the risk you took on the operational flight, but it was certainly some little reward. We used to go down to the pub of a night, and if we weren't flying the next day, and it'd be pretty good, but the English were funny in a way as far as Australians were concerned. Very strict on the discipline and saluting and all that sort of business, which we didn't bother to do. That used to really rile them. I remember shortly after we got there, an English sergeant, he said to me, "You've no idea what a great lift it gave us when we knew you colonials were behind us, you know." Bloody colonials. We haven't been colonials for bloody 40 years. We've had our own government, you know. And they still couldn't get it. And I wouldn't be a bit surprised today if there's a lot of English people still don't think of the colonies.
Despite his frustrations, Laurie and his crew began to undertake bombing raids. Prior to every raid, extensive briefings were given to the crews.
If you were doing a raid the next day, it would be on the board at 5 o'clock that afternoon. There'd be a briefing at 0600 hours. You knew you were doing a daylight the next day. You'd all be in the room, and then the back door would swing open, and the group captain, who was the station commander, the wing commander who was in charge of the squadron, and the two flight commanders would walk in, and they'd walk down the thing, you know. Station commander chaps, and all chaps would jump to our feet, and then they'd get up. The group captain, who was in charge of the whole station, not the squadron, he would announce that the target for today is Dortmund. Good luck, chaps. He'd sit down, and the wing commander then would tell you why you were going to Dortmund. It was a railway town, or it was this, or it was that, or something like that. Then they used to go through, the intelligence officer would give you briefings on what you might expect by way of fighters or anti-aircraft fire, or what you might expect on the way, or something like that. Then the meteorology bloke would give you a briefing on the weather. Then they would break up, and the pilots would take a special briefing on their own. The navigators would go off, and they'd draw up their maps and all that sort of business. Then you'd go and have a meal. Then you'd meet again in the briefing room, and you'd go and pick up your parachute, and then you'd go and get your flying gear on, your flying boots and helmet, and then you used to have to leave anything personal, like letters from home or anything like that. You weren't supposed to take anything like that with you at all. You weren't even supposed to take British money. The anti-aircraft fire was usually pretty intense. It was all around you, and there was nothing you could do about it. But often you could see other aircraft hit. And you could see these. The Germans didn't have to be all that smart. They knew that from their radar told them whether we were flying at 20,000 or 25,000, 21. Well, we couldn't get up to 25, 21,000 or 20,500 or whatever. They knew exactly. So they just used to send up a barrage of anti-aircraft shells to explode at 20,000 feet, and that's how they didn't pick out individual aircraft. They knew that there were 200 aircraft coming over the target area in a 10-minute period or a quarter of an hour period, and that's all they had to do. You didn't have time to be scared, you were busy. Probably, and a lot of people have asked, were you scared or anything like that? You weren't scared over the target area because you were busy. You had too much to do and it was just too important. Probably I would say that the only time you felt a bit of a twitch in your gut was when they told you what the target was and how important it was. Because you were there sitting at a desk, useless. You couldn't do anything or say anything, you were going and that was it. I'll tell you one thing that sort of brought me back to reality, or what was then called reality, I suppose. Shortly after we got on this, a couple of days after we got on the squadron, we did a daylight raid, and nobody came and sort of put their arm on your shoulder and said, this is all right, this is your first trip, lad, you'll be all right, and we were in the briefing with the rest of the crews, and you went off and nobody even said good luck or anything. A couple of days later we did another daylight, and then my name was down to do a night raid, but because I was a new crew and the other crew that arrived the same day as us on the squadron, that pilot and I went with experienced crews. I went with a fellow named Ken Chatting, and this other fellow went with another crew. We came back and we'd landed and we were just taxiing round to our dispersal point and heard a hell of a noise. First of all, we heard them call out V Victor, overshoot, and out. They'd come in too high, decided to go around again, and they didn't open the motors quick enough, and they crashed. And the 8 of them, there were 8, 7 and this extra pilot, were all killed. 100 yards off the end of the runway, they crashed and they were all killed. So the next day, I'd been to the, used to report to the flight office first thing in the morning, and down in the mess, and at lunchtime I said to somebody, when are they going to have the funerals? He said, what funerals? I said, those folks that were killed last night, because nobody mentioned it. We all knew what had happened. And he said, there's no funerals, mister. No funerals, son, there's a war on. And that was a bit of a shock to a young fellow. I was 20 at the time. I wasn't used to death, much less that sort of thing. But that was, you grew up fairly quickly.
He also found out there was little feedback for the pilots on their work, or indeed the work of the base at Snaith. Once he started his bombing raids, little was said about the operations.
All we used to hear was on the BBC News the next morning, 300 of our aircraft went to Dortmund last night. 3 of our aircraft are missing. We knew this was a lie because we'd often seen more than 3 of them shot down anyway. But it was a morale booster, as psychological, I suppose, as far as the British public was concerned.
One of the raids that Laurie remembers particularly was the raid to Heligoland and the after effects of it.
Heligoland was a German naval base in the North Sea, and they were determined to completely wipe it out. They waited for a day when it was sunshiny, there wasn't a cloud in the sky, and they waited for a day also when the wind was in the right position and at the right strength, so that after the first batch went in, the wind would blow the smoke on that away, so that the second lot, I know there were 20 minutes between waves going in, which was most unusual. We used to follow straight on, a minute, half a minute between one squadron going in and us going in after them. And we went in 40 minutes after the first lot went in, so we're in the third wave that went in. By this time there must have been very little left of Heligoland, but we were still directed by the master bomber as to where to go. We turned left, or to port as we would have said, and started to head back. And we were still within range of the target area, and we saw two of our aircraft collide. One came up from below and hit the other one. I don't know how they could have seen each other, but for some reason or other this bloke was coming up and this bloke was lowering. They dropped their bombs and they had no reason to be changing height. They should have just been, and should have been just heading back towards England and to their base. The one of my gunners, I think it was the mid-upper gunner, called out. He said, "These two planes are going to hit, Skipper," and I sort of turned slightly, heading towards them, and we saw them. We all saw them, and they just clashed. And of the 14 crew, 7 in each aircraft, we saw 5 parachutes, leaving 3 out of one and 2 out of the other, I think it was. And it was a sad moment when you thought, they probably thought that there was some hope for them. There wouldn't have been any hope because as soon as they landed in the North Sea, within about 2 minutes they'd have been dead. They'd have frozen, it would have been so cold. And there was nobody there to rescue them. What happened to the rest of the crew, the other 9 fellas, they would have crashed with the aircraft, which both those aircraft then plummeted into the North Sea. That was sort of upsetting, but there was just nothing you could do about it, and so we just headed back to base, and that was it.
Laurie was involved in 9 German bombing raids between March 12th and April 25th, 1945. And he still has the logbooks detailing the sites which were bombed by his crew.
In the early stages of the war, before they developed the cameras, blokes used to be dropping bombs all over the place and flying back home and saying, "Oh, we went to the target," They had no proof of it, so we had to have proof. If you didn't have proof of the photo of the bombs hitting the target or the target area, they didn't count that as a trip. The Germans very successfully had fake towns early in the piece. As a matter of fact, a lot of the early raids that were supposed to be on Berlin hadn't been anywhere near Berlin. They had a dummy town situated about 30 odd miles to the northeast of Berlin, and the crews had, oh, there it is, and they dropped their bombs, and but they soon woke up to that when the next day they'd send reconnaissance aircraft over there to get photos of the damage that had been done the night before, and they'd find that Berlin hadn't been touched.
It is unlikely that Laurie's family or anyone else ever knew of the dangers and the casualties that occurred during these raids. Censorship of the media by the British government often meant the events were unreported or understated regarding deaths and the destruction of aeroplanes.
Information in the newspapers the next day, the BBC would announce that last night 400 of our aircraft went to Frankfurt. 7 of our aircraft are missing, and that would be the end of it. And what used to really upset us was that 7 of our aircraft might have been missing, but it was 49 men. They never told us that 49 men were missing. What they say is the first casualty of war is the truth. And that was for morale purposes. But that's how they justified it.
Neither the British nor the Australians showed a great deal of enthusiasm for the American contribution to the war effort. However, the men of Bomber Command had their lighter moments with their American colleagues.
We used to sing a song occasionally when there weren't any Americans about. We didn't want to start World War III. There were 40,000 fortresses at 40,000 feet, 40,000 fortresses at 40,000 fortresses at 40,000 feet, but we've only got a teeny weeny bomb. Glory, glory, shall we drop it? Glory, glory, shall we drop it? Glory, glory, shall we drop it? Shall we drop our teeny weeny bomb? We don't do navigation, we just follow the guy in front. We don't do navigation, we just follow the guy in front. We don't do navigation, we just follow the guy in front, 'cause we've only got a teeny weeny bomb.
The war in Europe finally ended in May 1945. More than 3,000 Australians who served in the RAF Bomber Command died in the war.
Well, there was sort of rumours going around that a couple of days before that it looked like being fairly close at Eisenhower and Eisenhower was at the background, but Montgomery and the other fellows were closing in on them, and that it wouldn't be very long. And we'd been sort of, we really knew when they were, from the activities with the ground staff, that they weren't bringing any bombs or anything like that in. You knew that something was pretty close. And then they, I think we were in the mess at lunchtime, and news came through that the Germans had surrendered. Everybody sort of went mad for the rest of the afternoon.
The last bombing raid for Laurie was on April 25th, 1945, and then peace was declared. He and his crew were then supposed to join the war in the Pacific. However, this war ended before he could be deployed.
The news came through about 10 o'clock one night that the Japs had surrendered. Somebody rang the station commander, who was an Australian, and he had a private quarters, and said, "The news has just come through, sir, that the war in the Pacific is over." And he said, "Tell the sergeant in charge of the mess to keep the mess open." This was the officers' mess. And he walked in some 10 minutes later with his uniform on and his cap on. And if you wore a hat in the mess, you had to shout for the whole mess. And he kept the cap on, his hat on for some hours. And I don't remember how long I stayed, but it was still flowing there till 4 and 5 o'clock in the morning from 10 o'clock at night.
These celebrations amongst the crews went on into the night. Laurie, however, recalls his own personal feelings about the end of the war.
There didn't seem to be much to celebrate. I think probably at the back of your mind all the time was you were doing something dicey, something risky, even flying an aircraft, much less flying one over enemy territory where they're trying to shoot you and kill you, and really just that sort of business. That sort of gave you a lot of relief, I didn't want to be in a war. I don't think very few people do. It was necessary and something that had to be done. Okay, it's over. That's it. And that's why I think the word you used then is a good one, relief. Yeah. There didn't seem to be much to celebrate. We didn't hate the Germans. We hated the Nazis and what they stood for and all that sort of business and what they'd been trying to do. But young fellas as we were in those days, you didn't sort of think of that too much, really. when we went to bomb a town or a city in Germany, they didn't say, you're going to kill 500 civilians. They said, they got railway yards there, or they got a munition factory, or they got this, or they got something like that, and that's what you really went for, really.
The 70th anniversary of World War II made Laurie think a bit more about the effects of the bombing raids in which he was involved. This inspired Laurie to write to the 9 towns that were the targets of the bombing raids in which he was involved.
It was year 2015, which was the 70th anniversary of the end of the war in Europe. It was also the end of the war in the Pacific. But in May 2015, I was only concerned with the war in Europe, or the finish of the war in Europe. And I'd a few of us, and there weren't that many of us left, and there aren't many of us left today, sort of said, well, what's going to happen? They must be going to do something to celebrate 70th anniversary. None of us will be here for the 80th. So I started thinking, I thought, well, terrible, what we did and all that sort of business. And I thought, we must have done a lot of damage, which was worthwhile as far as winning the war was concerned. But what other damage did we do? What about those poor civilians? And I saw it in London. How the people were sleeping still in the underground. At the end of the war, that sort of had that sort of effect on the. Then I got to thinking. I thought, how would it be if the Japanese had been able to bomb Melbourne instead of Darwin? They'd have bombed, and I thought then, as I had mentioned earlier, they'd have bombed Footscray. And a few bombs may have fallen short and killed my parents who were living in Essendon. And I thought, golly, I must have killed a lot of civilians. And then I don't know, probably silly old man, I thought, I'll write to these people and tell them I'm sorry. And that's exactly what I did. I wrote a very simple letter. I just said, my name is Lawrence Larmer, and during the Second World War, I was served in the Royal Australian Air Force, and during the last 3 months of the war, I was with Royal RAF Bomber Command, and on such and such a date, and I checked it from my logbook, on such and such a date I was part of a force that bombed your city. I said, I can't recall the military reason for the raid, and for that I make no apology, but I do apologise very sincerely for killing and injuring so many innocent civilians, men, women and children. They said wars are awful things, and in years gone by they were fought between armies out in the field. But today, it's unfortunately different. And for any think that I may have done, I apologise and I'm sorry. Please accept my sympathy. Then about a fortnight or 3 weeks later, I started getting responses back from these various towns.
Accordingly, with the assistance of the German embassy, the letters were sent, and he received some interesting replies. For example, the mayor of Dortmund wrote, "Dear Mr. Larmer, for your letter to the city of Dortmund, passed on to us through the German ambassador to Australia, Dr. Muller, I wish to express my deepest respect and appreciation. I find it very remarkable that you made the effort to express your regrets regarding casualties among civilians during the bombing of our city during World War II. From today's perspective, we celebrate the end of World War II 70 years ago as the liberation of Germany from the Nazi dictatorship. Therefore, the bombing of our city during those last months and weeks of war was part of this liberation, even though it was undoubtedly associated with huge losses and sacrifices among the civilian population. In fact, by the end of the war, 93% of the centre of Dortmund was destroyed. After the war, we were given the opportunity to rebuild our city within a free and democratic country, which could not have happened if the Allied forces had not defeated us. So your mission with the Bomber Command of the RAF served a good purpose, even though it was unfortunately connected to civilian casualties. That's the complexity of war that is hard to understand at times. Today, Dortmund is a thriving city with about 600,000 citizens and a very multicultural population. We had many memorial ceremonies across the city to mark the 70th anniversary of the end of World War II and to remember the huge losses on both sides of the war parties involved and, of course, among the persecuted victims of the Nazi regime. So your letter arrived at a time very fitting for a deeper look back at the events of those times. We appreciate your expression of sympathy and thank you for sharing your feelings on those events so openly with us. It takes a very special person to be so considerate and compassionate, so again, thank you very much indeed for your message. On behalf of the people of Dortmund, I send you warm greetings and best wishes from Germany. Yours sincerely, Ulrich Sieru, Lord Mayor of Dortmund. He received 5 responses to his letters, including this one from Boisenberg, which expresses similar sentiments. Dear Mr. Larmer, many thanks for your letter. As the Mayor of Boisenberg, I was very surprised to receive it. Boisenberg and every German has to be happy that the Allied forces defeated Hitler Germany and freed the world from the horrible dictator. This is the reason that my country and even the Europeans live in peace for more than 70 years now. And peace is the reason for our prosperity. In the last 70 years, our country grew to one of the most respected countries of the world, and my generation, I'm 59 years old, is very proud to live in this country. I, for myself, would not like to live in a world that is not free, in a world where millions of people are pursued and killed because of their race, religion, colour, political opinion or sexual preference. I and my generation are very glad that everybody nearly can do anything except he hurts other people. This is only possible because you and people like you fought against the Nazis and won the war. 60 million people lost their lives because of the horrible ideology of some few persons that has been in responsibility for the cruel things that happened in the 30th and 40th of the last century. Figure what would have happened if the Allied forces wouldn't have won the war. This would be a terrible world. You did right in bombing the German cities, and it is not your guilt that civilians died during your attacks. The commanders of the German forces recruited children at the end of the war to stop the Allied advance. They sent them into death, knowing they didn't have any chance to win and survive. This is the big disgrace, and not your fight against the dictatorship with a target to subdue Europe and the world. I have to thank you for your fight, and I am very sad that the world has not really learned from the cruel time of World War II. Hope to hear of you again. Yours sincerely, Harold Jaschke, Mayor of the City of Boisenberg.
The word that came through from I think each of them was thank you, or the words, couple of words really, thank you, and understanding. We understand. You know, we appreciate what you've written to us, and we thank you, and we understand that you are a young soldier, obeying instructions, doing as you were told, following orders. One of them even, and it was from the Wangerooge, which is one of the Frisian Islands over near Denmark. And I remember that we flew across the North Sea that night to bomb that road, bomb that town. That was the only raid they had during the war. It was a diversionary raid from another attack that was going to take another raid that was taken somewhere else. I found that out later on. But he said that the mayor there thanked me and said that each year we celebrate the end of the war. We're so glad that it was over. And he said this year, he said I took what I did, he said, was and I hope you agree. I read the letter to the school children at this little ceremony we have, and he said it was quite emotional. It was a wonderful letter. And he said there were people there who were children at the time of the raid, some who had even lost relatives, uncles and aunties and parents, grandparents and what have you. That was one other one I remember said, thank goodness you did, you know, we'd have still had the Nazi party if you hadn't done what you did. So in a way, it was quite, the responses were quite humbling.
In the same year, Laurie was contacted by the French government and was awarded the Legion of Honour Medal, France's highest honour.
I got a letter from the French ambassador saying that he'd been instructed by the President of the French Republic to inform me that I'd been awarded the Legion of Honour, which he said was their highest military honour, something like that. And he said, we honour you or something like this because you risked your life in the liberation of France. And on the sometime later, they presented me with the medal, and I met the ambassador on that particular day, and I thanked him.
In an interview with ABC News in 1995, Laurie is quoted, he despaired that the world had not learnt from the devastation of the bombings.
You know, probably we always reckon the other bloke's unreasonable, that no good trying to talk to him, you know, he wouldn't agree, but takes two to tango, and I can look back a bit beyond the Second World War. The conditions we put on Germany after the First World War caused the Second World War, really, and we did it, you know. Billy Hughes was just as much to blame as Clemenceau and Woodrow Wilson and some of these other people, you know, really.
This letter from the German embassy perhaps sums up the effect of Laurie's letters. As the German Defence Attaché and as an officer of the Luftwaffe, I would like to personally let you know how very much impressed and deeply touched I was when I saw your letters, the newspaper articles in Germany, and the responses from the Lord Majors of the relevant German cities. If I may say so, even after many years of your military service, you are still showing the greatness of a true soldier and airman. There is hardly anything better than your letters to show how far reconciliation really stretches. Enemies can become friends indeed, and your letter and the reaction in Germany has shown that. The contribution of the Australians of the 51st Bomber Squadron is recorded in the memorial at Snaith Airfield to World War II. Laurie has recounted his stories in a number of interviews, one of which inspired this work by cultural commentator and cartoonist Michael Lernig.